Good afternoon, Shanika. It's a pleasure to have you here and thank you for joining. On behalf of the International Society of Cannabis, we are honored to have this opportunity to speak with you today. Barbados has distinguished itself as one of the Caribbean's most disciplined and patient centric medicinal cannabis jurisdictions, demonstrating a regulatory approach that aligns closely with international best practices. As the industry transitions from legislative preparation into active on the ground operations, your leadership within the BMCLA and your broader experience in public service have become important reference points for policymakers and stakeholders across the region. Today, we hope to explore the evolution of Barbados' medicinal cannabis sector, the operational realities now emerging, and the policy direction shaping the next phase of development. So it's a pleasure to have you here. And again, welcome to the NEXUS Caribbean Series.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
You're very welcome. So I'd love for you, before we get started with some of the questions, I'm sure there's many people out there that would love to know your background. I've personally dove into it, and it is very impressive. And I'd love for you to talk about how you've achieved so much in such a little time with your background. But please, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Sure. I My general background is more in terms of international trade policy. I have a master's in international trade policy. My bachelor's was really based on public sector management. I've spent quite a bit of time in the private sector handling imports and exports, specifically for the printing industry and some other industries as well. I've had the blessed opportunity to be involved to some extent as it relates to from a policy standpoint. I'm a former government senator. I've had the opportunity to interject and to add in some ways from a volunteer position to the landscape of Barbados from a policy perspective, yes, but also from a tangible in person perspective. I've had some unique opportunities. I think COVID brought everyone some unique opportunities. So I've been able to lead the 3D printing of face mask and face shield project that would have launched off here in Barbados. And I would have been able to accelerate the integration of 3D printing for one of our leading technical and vocational institutions here in Barbados. So that was, of course, a pleasure. That was one of my greatest babies during the COVID period, kept me from going a little bit cuckoo.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that among some other things, I've had great opportunities from a perspective of child care and child protection as a part of the child care boards of directors. And I look forward to continuing to add to Barbados's building. I originally would have joined the BMCLA at our founding as program administrator and had the opportunity to serve as second to our now Minister of Agriculture, Dr. Chantal Munro Knight, who has been able to elevate to minister and now leads us from a different seat. So that is how I came to the seat of CEO um, of the BMCLA.
Amazing. Yeah, I like I said, I did take some time to look into your background and very impressive. Your climb on the ladder doesn't seem to want to slow down. So, I think on behalf of ISC and myself, I mean, we're looking forward to all that you accomplish in the amount of time you have left because you seem to be just chewing up the places of position and power and I love it. You're a strong leader and I think we need a lot more of those. I want to dive into this. Obviously, being in the Caribbean, there's a lot of intersection with cannabis, growing up, or ganja, as they call it. And now that we're moving away from the stigma, I mean, it's going to take a little longer to move firmly away from it, and I think it'll follow us for quite some time. But we are starting to move into some more formal communications around it. Obviously, it's moved from marijuana and ganja to now cannabis. Changing the language a little bit. Don't think I didn't notice. And so we're evolving. So we want to, the Caribbean is one of those places I think everyone's always been interested in, but here in Canada and America and over across the waters in the UK and Germany, a lot of more attention has been over there. And I think just the challenges that we faced across the Caribbean and getting things streamlined. So I think this is an important call, not just for other regulators to hear how Barbados, specifically on this call, is managing some of these changing in the tides, but just overall the global I think the global community needs to have more of these conversations, so that we can work as a community as it stands. So, one of my first questions here is Barbados has now moved from legislative preparation into active operation, as I mentioned, with licensed medicinal cannabis facilities officially, opened on the island. From a regulatory perspective, how would you characterize the current stage of development?
From a regulatory perspective, I would still say that we are in stage one. Stage one, if you've examined how these things tend to progress, you start with a set of regulations. You see and recognize all the faults that lie in those regulations, and you do a second iteration. And I think we're right before our second iteration, at least I'm hopeful that we're before our second iterations.
Right.
There are many areas that I have been able to identify and that have been identified to me by our stakeholders, our partners, and the general public that have been hamstrung in terms of our ability to continue to accelerate onto the road as it relates to cannabis. And so our next step is trying to address those areas of concern and to address those regulatory issues while still being able to lift up a cannabis industry. And as you noted, we do have two active players who are both farmers and dispensaries. And that has been really important. Finding the middle ground, working with them, and creating an industry that works for Barbados.
And I do like the approach. You particularly are firmly, or hold a firm stance to define recreational cannabis versus medicinal. And I do think that's important. It is a medicine. And I think before we start getting into all this recreational use, it's really important that we are patient first, right? That we're leveraging the product, if you will, or the plant, as you will, as a medicine. So I do like that approach, and we'll get into your stance on that, in a moment. From over the last 12 months, we've seen significant movements on the retail and clinical front. From your vantage point, how would you evaluate the tangible progress made in cultivation, processing, and domestic product availability?
Run that one for me again. How would
Sure.
I?
No problem. So over the last 12 months,
Mhm.
we've seen significant movement on the retail and clinical front. From your vantage point, how would you evaluate the tangible progress made in cultivation, processing, and domestic product availability?
What I will say is, I would evaluate to the extent that we have managed to do what most people felt wasn't possible. Generally, the perspective would have been because of how conservative Barbados is, the road most people thought we would be forced down was very strict in terms of finished product. And we have managed to find and be able to bring flower to the public in a way that works for us because we don't allow for smoking. And I know that that is the biggest problem when most people interact with us. How could you not allow for smoking? But Barbados has been a society that we, for very many years, have attempted to be able to release persons from the entanglement with nicotine. And so our medical community was very adamant at the time that they did not want to co sign anything that would lead back to that area. Now, do we have people that smoke? Yes. Are they allowed to smoke? No. um, and so, from a medical standpoint, what we've been able to do is allow for vaping, dry flowered vaping, which allowed us to be able to have flower on the market. And as most people will tell you, flower accounts for about 70% of all sales. So there was an impossibility of bringing a market to true fruition without being able to provide for that aspect of the market. And so we've been really happy to be able to do that. We have also had what we consider to be a mixed bag when we talk about what we've been able to bring to the public. And I say that because we have allowed the importation through the traditional pharmacies of medicinal cannabis oils and creams. And that has been solely based on the fact that we have not yet been able to stand up from a full manufacturing perspective. Um, Manufacturing plants for those items and manufacturing plants to the level of a pharmaceutical grade manufacturing plant. And that has always been something that has been very, very important to us. Now, we do have oils produced by the dispensaries, but that is more produced in a compounding format.
Right.
So the pharmacist and his individuals create those products, and then they're be able to create unique products for patients as they come in and with their needs suited towards whatever ailment they are experiencing and what their doctor has instructed they need to have. And that has been great. Tailor-made medicine is definitely someplace I think we would all love to be able to go. But it does mean that that wider manufacturing stand-up aspect of the industry is still a little ways off. But we are definitely hoping our best to shrug towards that. Some of the issues that we faced is that, as you pointed out, Barbados is a place that we live to punch above our weight, and we deal basically with international standards, and that has always been the aspect in our medical community. And so, what we have been trying to do is how do you maintain an international standard while still taking account of the local realities and building an industry that meets local standpoints. Because you always have to be cognizant of where you are in terms of your capabilities locally when you are standing up something like this. And I think that that is something that we have been under heavy consideration. I think we've got a few solutions and looking to work with our medical community towards creating standards that make sense for us locally.
And that makes absolute sense. I'm sure you get a lot of pushback with respect to the smoking side of things and just kind of the approach. But, I think one of the most important ways that we can globally legalized is, as they say, measure twice and cut once. A lot of regions and a lot of regulatory bodies have worked the other way around. They've cut before measuring at all, and we see the pitfalls of that. The retrofitting, and it's not fun, and it's not cheap. So Barbados is definitely taking the right approach, especially with a consumer centric or patient centric focus. Earlier this year, the BMCLA indicated that two additional medicinal cannabis centers are advancing towards operational readiness in 2026. What can you share about the development of these projects and how might they reshape the current landscape?
Well, what I can share is this.
Share
When
it
it
all with
comes
us.
to when it comes to conversations about what's coming, it's always such a tentative thing when you have those conversations
Right.
because them coming online is really not necessarily based on myself or my amazing staff. I just want to point out that nothing that I do could ever be done without the amazing people that
I
help
love
me
that.
every single day. But and so those two facilities have their own path as it relates to being able to be up and running. We can always say, I can always tell you they have their licenses. Um, but in terms of being able to have their facilities ready, being able to have the equipment that they're interested in, having their workers employed, being ready to be open and functioning is solely in their hands. And so we normally get the call once we've issued the license. We normally get the call. Okay, the facility is ready for you to inspect, and then we say, okay, everything looks great. You can go ahead and get started. That takes time. So yes, it is my fervent hope that those facilities will be open this year, but I can't give a guarantee on that, and that's the unfortunate truth about that. How those facilities possibly could change the landscape, that would be telling. I think there's some exciting positions that they can bring to the fore. But as you can appreciate in this business sense, from a regulatory standpoint, some things until they're announced are trade secrets. So I will
100%.
leave that fairly in their realm to make public.
I love the alley oop for a follow up with you. That's great. No, we definitely take advantage of that. We'd love to have you back. So let's talk about compliance and seed to patient tracking for a moment. The BMCLA's partnership with GrowerIQ, my apologies, has been widely recognized as a major step towards international grade compliance. How are licensees and regulators utilizing the platform in daily operation? And how critical is this data in safeguarding the integrity of the medicinal supply chain?
Well, it allows us to be able to really know what is going on at the facilities in terms of from the cultivation standpoint, in terms of seeds, seedlings, plants that are up and running, where things are, what is being placed in terms of growth in terms of what is going to be ready as it relates to harvesting, and allows us to keep an eye on the facilities. But we have more than just one eye on the facilities. All of the facilities are monitored by camera, and I have a compliance team that monitors each of the facilities, and they visit those facilities each week, and they do some verifications. So it allows for a certain amount of trust but verify, which is always my favorite
Trust
statement.
and verify. Yep.
Yes. So the facilities, they upload their numbers, and it's a process. The facilities themselves are new to software in terms of the functional operations of how they're doing things. So they're uploading their information, and my officers are then just double checking the information in physical form when they go, so that we build that level of trust and feedback, and it allows us to really understand what is going on, and it also allows the facilities to be able to check, and to be able to have a physical representation of the activities that they're going on daily, and records. And that has always been important. It also allows us to be able, if there are any issues, to be able to track. We can track the code on each package back through the system to when it was harvested, what batch it was, when that batch would have been planted, and what would have been used on that particular batch. So it's very important from a seed to sale, from a tracking standpoint, to be able to check and verify, and then for us to be able to safeguard patients. And that's important for us too. Safeguarding patient health is critical in this industry. And this gives us that one additional tool to be able to do that. So our partnership with GrowerIQ has been great, and hopefully it will grow. I see them continuing to do new things, continuing to take on new companies, and some of it has been very interesting. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about our advanced relationship sometime in the future.
I love that. I love that. Um, Regulatory and operational bottlenecks.
Mm, there are many.
There are so many. That's why I chuckled, because I'm like, we're there's so many. Even with a healthy number of licenses approved, operators continue to face challenges ranging from capital requirements to banking limitations. From a regulatory standpoint, what do you see as the primary bottleneck still restricting industry growth?
Banking.
Yes, I knew you were going to say that. I
The
knew,
quick
and I have a
question that
question
you
around that.
asked Rakeem should tell you how much of an issue is. Banking is a critical component. And like I always tell people, my fervent personal motto is always over, under, through, as in there's always a way to get something done. But banking has been the critical problem. We continue to have a huge amount of interest from persons. Some of our licensees continue to have a significant amount of interest from persons who want to invest, be a part, who want to come in. But the issue is always, how are they moving those funds? And then how are they being able to issue dividends to shareholders and those kinds of conversations? So banking is a huge issue. Right now, our facilities operate in cash. And as you know, when California started out, that was how they started out as well. So it's not an impossibility to have an industry. We have an industry, but that acceleration, that next step, is hindered by the banking associate, well, by the banking issue. Here in Barbados, our banking association runs that format, and we have had significant amounts of conversations with them, meetings with them, in an attempt to be able to find a pathway that would work for their uncomfortability with the subject of cannabis, medicinal cannabis, and also be able to facilitate the industry. We've not been able to find a solution that works for them as of yet. So right now, the cannabis industry is not bankable in Barbados, and that has presented a problem for licensees and for investors. Um, and I always say, it is an impossibility to keep people out of something that they want to be in, but it does present a significant problem.
And I'm going to pull for a question I had later on, because it relates directly to banking. And before I ask the question, do you find that these institutions or associations are more open to non-plant touching interactions or transactions, or do you find that it's just a blanketed approach to cannabis uh, restrictions as a whole?
I would say it's more a blanketed approach. If they if they are identified as cannabis companies, then that is where the problem comes into it. Um, I find that, and I understand their standpoint. And so let me be clear: I am not anti-banking. I have a bank account. I do
No, of
enough,
course, yeah, no, of course. It is.
but
It's the realities of what we're
it's the
dealing with.
reality of
Yeah,
the situation. So Barbados doesn't have any indigenous banks. What we have are banks that are all US correspondent banks. Even in terms of our credit unions by law bank with the banks, and therefore they are held to those rules. Because all of our banks are US correspondent banks, and the cannabis on medicinal cannabis is not legal on a federal level in the United States, is where the problem becomes. And because the banks don't want to lose their correspondent banking relationships, which allow them to move money across the world, that is where the fear comes into it. And so they, in some cases, don't even want to broach the conversation with their correspondent banking partner to ensure that they do not find themselves in a problem. And so that I understand their concern. What our issues are is national concerns for me have to trump fear. And
one
that's the
hundred percent,
reality of this.
one
And,
hundred percent.
and the government in of itself, the government of Barbados, the government of St. Lucia, St. Kitts, the Caribbean governments have shown a tremendous amount of bravery as it stands to step into these areas, knowing the circumstance, but also understanding that it is about national development. It is about helping patients, but also helping your country to be able to have another leg to stand on economically. And so my fervent hope is that our banking association takes on the spirit of our Caribbean governments, hopefully sooner rather than later, as it relates to a bit of bravery, and stand with the country as it relates to how we can work together to add this additional leg to the economic standpoint of Barbados.
100% well said. And I think it's fair to say that the US has their thumb on a lot of movement when it comes to global legalization or global movement for that matter. Now that we're moving slowly, but moving from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 in part, the banking will effectively change.
There is a possibility of it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, hopefully. Yeah, the hopefully will
Just
come
a
in.
whole lot of, a whole lot of hopes and prayers, and the international cannabis community has, lived on hopes and prayers for quite a long time.
Absolutely.
And so,
And lobbying.
and lobbying. And so we can hope and prayer, but we also have to base regulatory actions on substantive ground. And the reality is that it depends on what that rescheduling looks like, right? The devil is in the details. So, what are the details of that rescheduling really going to look like? Does it speak towards hemp only? Does it speak towards the entirety of the genius cannabis? Does it speak, and in what format does that come into play? And does that then come into play from a perspective of affecting inter US transmission of cannabis and funds, or does that extend towards external transmission? So there are many things in that still to be settled, but I do view it as a step forward. Do not get me wrong; it cannot always be doom and gloom. It is a step forward in the right direction, and I'm happy to see it. I just I'd love to see the text of any document before I jump for joy.
As given your background, that makes absolute sense. I'm going to ask the question. I mean, you've answered it, but I'm hoping we can pull a little bit more on that because in a monetary world that we live in, financial finances involved are involved everywhere we go, and in emerging industries, doesn't matter if it's cannabis or tech, capital is always a critical point. So I do want to ask, and I do realize that cash is one of the issues, and we've seen what comes with cash transactions. And this is one of the main reasons establishing a framework and a pathway around financial safety or transactional safety is important because cash creates a lot of safety issues. And we want to make sure, although we are trying to protect patients, we got to protect the public at large overall. Traditional commercial banks in Barbados remain cautious, as you had mentioned, due to US federal constraints, prompting the BMCLA to explore alternative solutions such as digital payments. What practical financial pathways are operators using today, if not just exclusively cash? And what long-term regional strategies are being discussed to address these banking limitations?
What I can say is there is an organization called the Caribbean Cannabis Forum, in which all of these CEOs of the region gather. And we have those conversations every few months to kind of talk out how we are able to get over some of the hurdles. And some of us are advanced. St. Vincent has a banking situation sorted. And our fervent hope is that we're able to to move a bit further with that particular aspect. Um, I believe that there is potential. There is potential in the St. Vincent Avenue, but it is going to take some time. And it is different for all of us. It is a bit easier for the Eastern Caribbean countries as they tend to share a platform amongst them. For Barbados and indeed for Jamaica, we tend to be on our own a bit. And so we, in terms of having a shared platform, that's going to take some time to see whether or not that can really work out. As we tend to open up to the world, and as Barbados tends to open up to the world more, there are more interesting platforms coming on. We've made an MOU with M Money, a digital platform that in of itself presents some level of opportunity and avenue. Barbados has recently launched BIMPay. um, we are exploring whether or not that could potentially offer us some avenues. And there are some other digital payment formats which are, I believe, coming to Barbados. And so we tend to keep our eye on that prize in terms of how we can make that avenue. As you can appreciate, a free market, it's very difficult to force persons sometimes to interact. But I think as we continue to deal with the position of stigma, as we continue to make it more accessible, as we continue to make this a realistic part of the Barbadian landscape, I think that that set of fear will decrease to some extent. There are also some moves locally as it relates to the credit union and the legislation that governs them. So we are hopeful. This is a matter that sits quite above my ability to be able to address. But I
Fair.
do know that I've had extensive conversations with the Minister of Finance, and I do know that we have brought this matter through my minister before the government itself. And I am confident in my Prime Minister to do what is necessary to ensure that there are avenues, no matter how long that may take. I do believe that that is something that is in her eyesight and that she will address in due time.
Well, communication is not something that you're shy from. You're definitely a welcoming, and you're a team player, as you had mentioned before. So I think it's fair enough to say that communication is happening where it needs to happen, and we'll just have to sit back and see how that unfolds. Is that fair to
It,
say?
so it's a fair assessment, and I think that's true for everyone.
Yeah,
The best that you can do in life oftentimes is to put your case before the fore and hope that you have communicated its urgency as necessary.
absolutely. Sticking on similar topics and trying to balance foreign investment and local equity, Barbados has taken a deliberate step to ensure local participation through tiered fee structures, small farmer protection, and parallel frameworks such as the Sacramental Cannabis Act. How effective do you feel the country is balancing foreign investments with equitable opportunities for local entrepreneurs?
So let me start this out by how I like to start these things, with making sure there are clear lines of responsibility. Sacramental cannabis is legal. It is handled by the Attorney General's office, not my kettle of fish. Recreational cannabis is illegal in Barbados. See the police. Medical cannabis is my forte.
That's right.
In terms of balancing, I say that in jest in some aspects. Those are the realities. But I say that only to say that the way that Barbados has balanced it in some aspects as it relates between sacramental and medical has been to separate the two. Has been to give sacramental cannabis use um, its due deference from a religious standpoint and to carve out that space separate and distinct from the medical space. And so that is that aspect. We've also gone to the point of making sure that if you're opening a medicinal cannabis company, at least 30% of most of those companies, I think there's only two caveats, which I believe are research and development and laboratory. But every other license has to have a Barbadian individual owning at least 30% of the organization. We have attempted through many different variations to be able to create space, and it has. Each of the facilities that are open are owned by, in part, by Barbadians. But the reality is that for some, they don't feel like we have done enough. And I will be honest with you, I think there is still a significant amount of things we can do. And we have been placing some ideas before the minister as to how we can do that. And we have gone through it tremendously. As you can appreciate, Barbados is a country that affords quite a bit to its citizens. And so government must weigh what we have to spend in education, what we have to spend in healthcare, what we have to spend in national security against what it potentially would look to spend in medicinal cannabis industry. And so we have two potential ideas that I'm very, very proud of, but I can't put anything on the floor right now, which I believe we will put before the relevant authorities. And I'm hopeful that they will take those on. We have tried at every turn to be able to offer opportunities to Barbadians. Even as you look at the cost of our licenses are 5 years. Most license frameworks anywhere in the world aren't that long. Our licenses from range, depending on what kind of license you're looking at, you can get a license for $5,000 if you're talking about import and export, or you can get the lowest tier agricultural or cultivation license. And so the reality is when you break that down, if we say it's 30,000, when you break that down to a monthly perspective, they're in fact significantly less money than some of the others. But I also recognize that for some persons who may want to be involved in the industry, it is not enough. Um, and I understand that. And my general perspective, and being as a child in this country who has been able to benefit significantly from political figures and persons in government pushing harder to be able to meet allowances. I understand that we need to continue to push harder to be able to make space for persons to be called in the industry. But it must always be balanced by the needs nationally. It must always be
Yeah.
balanced by the reality of who we are as Barbadians and how we tend to operate. And the reality of the situation is that we are all unique in this Caribbean space. We are all alike, but we are all unique. And
100%.
Barbados has a very specific perspective, and how we go about things is always very uniquely Barbadian.
I love that. I love that. So while the core medicinal products are now available locally, just sticking with the opportunities for international partners on this foreign investment or between local investment in local equity and foreign investments. While the core medicinal products are now available locally, several advanced segments such as extractions, certified laboratory testing, and export channels remain underdeveloped. Where do you see the most urgent of opportunities for international technical partners to contribute?
Most definitely in manufacturing. I think that our technical partners, persons coming into the industry and investing, that is where they will find the most fruit as it relates to where Barbados wants to go. Recently, our Prime Minister has been very clear that we are embarking on a pharmaceutical manufacturing bent. We intend to be able to make our mark in that area. And I think from a manufacturing standpoint in cannabis, there is a lot that can be assisted locally by investors coming in and being able to help us stand up that manufacturing aspect and stand it up to an international level. As we spoke before, Barbados does not often do things that we consider to be less than exceptional if we can. And so the intent is that we continue to do that. Um, and we continue to aim for that. We don't always meet the mark, but we certainly try. And that is always my aim. So definitely manufacturing is where I see a lot of possibilities. And laboratory, most definitely. I think there is a lot of space from a laboratory standpoint, not just for Barbados, but also for the rest of the region. I think laboratory is something that this region can definitely benefit from. But I think one of the issues, and I think that we have noticed that if you look across the international landscape, companies that only deal in cannabis laboratory testing don't often survive. And the reasoning for that is there often isn't enough of that testing to be able to sustain a company on a day-to-day basis. But I think that as we are expanding from a manufacturing standpoint in goods and services, as we are expanding from a pharmaceutical aspect in manufacturing, as you know, across the Caribbean, there are various aspects of manufacturing and new aspects, nutraceuticals. I think there is fervent area for laboratory testing, and I think that is something that investors can truly add. So definitely manufacturing and laboratory.
Love that. And I agree with you. I think that is foundational requirements in order to stand up the industry. I absolutely agree. As the BMCLA enters into its sixth year and begins receiving real patient and supply chain data, what major policy updates or regulatory adjustments should stakeholders anticipate over the next 12 to 18 months?
Oh, goodness. Let me get on my crystal ball somewhere. I
To the
can
best of your ability.
to the best of my ability. I can tell you where I see things that have been identified to us by stakeholders as they would like to see changes. There is a significant amount of stakeholders who spoke to us on an edibles standpoint, and how they need edibles to be able to operate. And that's stakeholders, not just locally, but also Barbados is a very big tourist destination. And a lot of the tourists would have also mentioned that that is something that they need, those who are patients. And so those are some areas that have been identified towards us. There has been some conversation with regard to some other areas that we can kind of open up as it relates to our transport sectors and some of our requirements here there. There are some other conversations that persons have wished to be able to have, specifically in terms of um, products that are on the market, specifically in terms of how some of the manufacturers are allowed to operate currently in Barbados. Because cannabis is a prescribable product, our licensees are not allowed to advertise medicinal cannabis products, right? And so the dispensing licensees cannot advertise that they sell medicinal cannabis products. And so you can appreciate it's a catch 22 situation where I have the license to be able to sell, but I'm not be able to advertise the fact that I have the products to sell. Um, it's an
Growing
interesting
pains. Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting thing, and it is really truly based on some of the laws in Barbados that speak about not advertising pharmaceuticals, and a lot of that is based. And I understand the perspective of the medical community, but it is based on products that are advertised. They just aren't advertised here. We all know what Viagra is. We all can go on the internet and access that information. So there's no need to advertise Viagra in Barbados. It is very easy for you to maintain that law that says you can't advertise pharmaceuticals
This
because all of
communication's
the
already happening.
exactly
Yeah.
because the pharmaceuticals come from overseas anyway, and so they're advertised over the internet, over the foreign TV. So when it comes to medicinal cannabis products, when it comes to locally grown and made products, that now presents its own set of issues. And so we have had significant conversations with our stakeholders about it, and about the issues that that sort of presents for them. But also, to be fair, our law, when we stood it up, was also, I think, in some aspects, very well done. When we did our regulations, where other countries, other regions um, restrict what you can prescribe medicinal cannabis for. We absolutely did not do that. We kept that relationship between you and your doctor and empowered your doctor and the patient to make that decision themselves.
Yeah.
When it comes to a restriction on the particular kind of cannabis, the genius or the particular strains that can be sold. While we do have the ability to limit that, we have not limited that, because we want to be able to, for those patients in need to find a strain that works for them, to find a product that works for them. And so we have tried our best to keep it patient centric. As I said, we have the ability to limit it, but we've not found the need at this point in time. So I would
100%.
add those to the list of things I think we have done correct. And so I always try to make sure, I am fully honest about what hiccups we may have had, but we have done a lot of things well. And so it is important that we bring both to the fore.
I love that. Ownership and accountability is, in my opinion, some of the strongest stepping stones towards success and growth. Being able to identify, what have I done that didn't work? How do I strengthen that? And I think being restrictive is actually more of a chokehold than it is a safety measure in some respects. If you don't know how things are going to work, it's hard to develop systems and to create opportunities around um, medicinal, because everyone's different, right? So if you say, well, we're going to restrict this and this, you might have just cut off 60% of who needs it for a particular ailment. So that approach to, let's just see what works, and we're in a continuous cycle of learning at this stage. No matter what corner of the earth, I mean, even Uruguay is still learning till today. And they go back to, I believe, 20, what is it, 2013, if I'm not mistaken. So everyone is going to continue to learn, and I think having that open-mindedness is really important. And I love that for Barbados. Truly, true leadership in motion. You'd mentioned briefly about tourism, and I want to address global misconceptions real quick. International observers often assume Caribbean jurisdictions are building adult use tourism markets. Barbados, however, maintains a strict clinical pathway requiring physician evaluation, even for visitors. What is the single biggest misconception about the Barbadian medical cannabis framework, and what is the ground reality stakeholders should understand?
Goodness. Hmm. What is the biggest misconception? Well, one of them is what you just advised, which is that everything is a free for all. Uh, that is definitely not how Barbados operates. We abide by the rule of law as it relates to medicinal cannabis. And so, as you pointed out, it does require a doctor prescription. There are some on the other end of the spectrum that oftentimes think they're going to have to jump through scholastic hoops to get anything done. Um, that's not true. We have done our best to empower our doctors. We've done a lot of training with the medical community in Barbados. Our facilities oftentimes there are physicians who are attached to both facilities. One facility, a physician is stationed in there every day. Another facility has access to a medical doctor. In fact, one of our facilities engages in telemedicine to be able to facilitate those coming into Barbados. Barbados has always been a place where we facilitate tourists in as much as we possibly can. And it is very important for us that we do that. Um, One of the misconceptions I often find is a lot of persons want to be able to say, how do they get their products into Barbados? I'm like, it's not that easy. And it shouldn't
Yeah,
be. If you're
right.
trying to stand up a local industry, it shouldn't be. If you are trying to safeguard patient care, it shouldn't be. And so that is one of the cognizance that we have to kind of make sure. And one of the clear things is persons tend to look at the Caribbean as a homogeneous group. We're all, like they paint us with the same brush. We're all the same. We're not. We absolutely are not. And that is reflective in our laws, but it's also reflective in the way that we implement our laws and the way that we carry things out. And so persons landing in St. Vincent will find that landing in Barbados is a very different experience. Landing in Antigua is a very different experience. Um, and I often say it, and I say it because it's true, so it may be a cliche. We took the same trip on the same ship, but it dropped us off in different places, and those places have impacted how we operate. And so I
Mm.
think that is one of the biggest conceptions for almost anything. Everybody thinks everyone in the Caribbean is the same. We are not. And so access is different, quality is different, the way that we handle situations is different, the way
Perspective is different. Yeah.
perspectives are different, and we're also quite similar, so I guess it's a little confusing. We are very similar. We have a great amount of love for each other and a great understanding, and I have an absolute appreciation for my brothers and sisters across the Caribbean. The members of the Caribbean Cannabis Forum have been incredible in coming together, sharing information, welcoming new persons. We're hopeful to welcome a few new members, hopefully sometime this year. Grenada is coming on stream, Bahamas is coming on stream, and
Okay.
we have done our very best to be able to integrate because we understand that we fight this fight together. Yes, we are different. Yes, we have different perspectives, and we actually look at how we can possibly harmonize in the days to come. One hopes, but we try our best to work together to see how we can put Barbados, St. Vincent, St. Kitts, Jamaica, the entirety of the Caribbean on the map because we are unique. We have a unique connection to cannabis, and that is something
Absolutely.
that should be celebrated, even if we are not all at the free up the weed kind of stage.
Yeah, yeah.
We all, I think, have grown a respect for the plant and how that operates. We just also have certain restrictions. So, very much in Barbados, recreational use of cannabis is illegal. Medicinal use is legal, and we do
It's
create pathways that you can go ahead. My two facilities, one is called Island Naturals, and that one is at Sheraton and Sheraton Center, Christchurch, and the other is called Island Therapeutics, that is at Worthing. And they both have their own perspectives and their own unique price points and brands. And so there is space for everyone within the cannabis industry. You just need to find your own niche and play the card.
love it. You're absolutely right. When you look across the Caribbean, one and the same, very unique. um, and yeah, I mean, I think that's what makes the Caribbean so special is that depending on what island and what group of people you're around, you're going to have a very different experience in the Caribbean, whether it's Barbados or Jamaica, St. Kitts, um, or St. Vincent. You're gonna have a very different experience. You spoke earlier about not so much the difficulties, but just the requirement of ensuring safety around having products involved or brought into the island. Given that, and this is just speaking with clinical consistency and batch specific data, given the medical cannabis flower does not carry a traditional pharmaceutical drug code, how is the BMCLA using batch specific cannabinoid data from GrowerIQ to support physicians in prescribing consistent dosages to patients?
Well, we are collecting the data as it stands. One of the great things about our two facilities is because of our format is doctor prescribed and pharmacists dispense. The pharmacists do a lot of the follow up when it comes to patients. So they do a lot of the calling the patients to identify how something has worked, whether it has worked, what ways in which it has worked, and any kind of adverse effects that they have. And they have been able to, in some ways, share that with us. But they also share that with the doctors as they come through, which has allowed them to kind of understand. One of the things that I've been very clear about as my knowledge of cannabis has grown is that cannabis is unique. And each patient's reaction to cannabis is unique. In
Right.
truth and in fact, at our last conference, we hold a conference every 2 years called Beige Can. The last one was the first one. We're having another one this year,
Nice.
first weekend in November. But one of the things we had at our last one is there would have been a Dr. Kariko Weldon, and she would have done some genetic testing for free at our conference. And based on her genetic testing, she was able to identify based on um, your genetic background um, what your reaction to medicinal cannabis um, was likely to be based on your genetics. And some of us metabolize THC very well. Some of us don't metabolize THC very well. Some of us, it's more CBD driven. But I say all of that to say there's a uniqueness when it comes to how someone's body is going to react to cannabis. What I can say is that the doctors, we really left that up to the medical community as it relates to them identifying the uniqueness, and really their follow up in terms of the data, for reactions. It has been an area we have been considering, and we have had some close communications, coming from a trip that I would have taken to, a conference in Germany. And so I'm hopeful that by next year we're able to, um, use this data in a way to assist us with exactly what you're talking about. But as of right now, we're collecting the data, and it is mostly used by our pharmacists and our doctors towards, tweaking patient care.
I like that. That's a very interesting point, and you're right. We all metabolize it differently. We have endogenous cannabinoids. You know, there's the endocannabinoid system, that everyone, whether you like cannabis or you don't like it, welcome to the world of endogenous cannabinoids. The entourage effect is important, right? A lot of people, when they think of cannabis, they just think of THC, and there's so much more to it. How CBD balances out THC, how CBN and CBG are important, and how even terpenes interact with that. So having someone that is able to identify genetic compatibility is a really unique approach. I think that's really interesting. I like that. I really appreciate your time, Shanika, and this has been such an amazing back and forth. I have one last question before we close out, being the busy individual that you are. This one is focused specifically on agriculture and supply chain challenges. Meeting medical grade standards, pesticide free, heavy metal free, and consistent and clinically consistent requires significant infrastructure, of course. What are the main agriculture and supply chain obstacles preventing more approved licenses from becoming fully operational?
I wouldn't say that that has been a significant issue in terms of help preventing them from becoming operational. What I will say is that it presents, some difficulties as it relates to, persons being able to operate to standards. And one of the things you have to understand when you deal with cannabis is at its core, it's just a plant. And there's a lovely woman from Trinidad who that is her statement. Stay calm, it's just a plant. And I absolutely love that because it's so true. It's a plant. And so when you have plants, the heat, where Barbados, I swear to you, goes through some tremendous baking in the sun sometimes. The weather, the differing, effects, and systems that come through affect the plant tremendously. Um,
100%.
and so it is one of those very specific situations in which, as I said, you have to be cognizant of local realities. And one of the local realities is if you allow for greenhouse or outdoor grow, you have to allow for the fact that there will be variation in the product that you get. There's just no way around that. Product variation is going to happen with the plant. Plant is a living creature. It will have effects and issues, and we've experienced that before. One of the things that we have been cognizant of is, as things happen, correcting the issues. And that is what we have found has been the biggest issue for us, correcting problems as they go. When it comes to supply chain, luckily Barbados is one of those great selling points that we always give to investors, is that Barbados is plugged into almost everywhere. There is access to the world, and the world comes to Barbados. So from a supply chain standpoint, we haven't had much issues in that cognizant. One of the biggest problems that we have had, and I'm hopeful to be able to address that, was less about dealing with, getting products and plant matter here, and more about dealing with the plant matter that is here. And I say that because Barbados has its own land rights. There are seeds that have been developed in this country, which I think would be very useful towards the medicinal cannabis industry. But because they are firmly on the illegal side of things, that has been the problem as it relates to how we are
Right.
able to make use of that very unique resource. Um, and so we haven't been able to do that yet. And so my hope is that is another one of those areas, that we are able to kind of crack open, to make proper use of the resources that are available to us.
Do you find, and this is totally off the just you haven't received this question, so I'm
Sure.
just curious.
Mhm.
When I've been in this space for some time, going back to California 2012 and watching legalization in Canada in 2017, and again, different states and different countries around the world since. I've noticed the divide between what was and what is becoming. And I almost find that, and I know the legalities around it are the cause of what I'm trying to get to. Traditional growers have been doing this for a very long time and understand this plant unequivocally. Whereas a lot of regulators and new entrepreneurs, let's call them, that are getting into the space, whether it's from a capital perspective or just an interest in entrepreneurship, that merge of the two worlds seems to be water and oil.
Yes.
Within your capabilities of answering this question, why do you, or from your perspective, do you feel that there would be much more success if we embraced the knowledge of traditional growers? Some of the, and I know when it comes to some of the seeds, like there's other issues that I'm not going to get into right now with respect to land race and things of that nature, but that collaboration, I almost feel like globally traditional growers have been excluded from the conversation, but they add tremendous value that I think we're missing out on. I'd love for you to just kind of speak openly on your opinion of it and shape it however you wish. How do you feel the lack of interaction with traditional growers and the new emerging global cannabis community is? How do you feel or do you feel that that's a disservice that we're not interacting with those legacy farmers and traditional growers?
I do think it's a disservice, but I think it's a disservice that sits on both ends. From the legacy farmer aspect, I fully understand. Well, I can fully appreciate their issue. I can fully appreciate fighting and, in some cases, dying, being arrested for access to a plant, and having trudged through many, many years of learning and growing to be able to bring this to the fore. And then to have it to the fore, and then not to be at the forefront of this new industry. Well, is new to other persons, but not new to you. I can also understand from a regulatory standpoint some of the issues that are faced. I, given the task of making essentially the illegal legal, make essentially the task of making something into an industry that fits into the framework of how society operates and how industry operates, and bringing it into the light. And so the formats and structures that we were forced to put in place from a regulatory standpoint do not often fix the perspective and the method of in which our traditional operators want to be able to operate. And so the issue is that there has to be a let go on each side. Our traditional farmers have to understand that yes, you are all flowers and blessings towards you. You have been the cause of this coming to the fore, but it has to now step into a different light. It has to now step into a different way of being and a different way of operating in order to make it what you wanted it to be, a respected form of a regulatory landscape. And our regulatory aspects also have to release a little bit of that in terms of understanding that you have to meet people where they're at and take them on the journey with you. But there has to be an understanding that a regulator only operates on the law that is available to them. Um, there are many things that I understand, and there are many things that I would love to be able to do that I cannot because it does not fit within the context of the law, which I do not make, but I do enforce and regulate. And so there has to be that meeting of the minds. And I think oftentimes, our traditional partners often villainize the regulators because they believe that we are the people holding them back and taking away opportunities. While our regulators sometimes feel as though if you would only just work within the regulations, this could work. And so
Yeah.
it is a back and forth. And I sometimes tell people, I have tried to take the position of that I sit between the nexus of free up the weed and dash away the weed crowd. I try to sit between the nexus of a regulator who understands what should happen from a moral standpoint and what should happen from a regulatory standpoint, and try to make the two mesh together. Have I been tremendously successful in that? I leave that to to life to judge when I've moved from this particular position. But I understand that there is more to be done. There is more that could have been done, particularly in Barbados, and there's more that should be done. And my job is to try my best to put those positions before policymakers and hope that they take that on. But it is also to encourage our traditional partners to operate in legal ways, a part of the legal framework that is now available to them, so that we can all go on the road together.
I love it. And for those of you listening that are not familiar with Shanika, please check her out. She is a force to be reckoned with. She is absolutely a team player. And I think with you at the helm, a lot of evolution is going to happen, but methodically and calculatedly. And I think the world is watching Barbados. Barbados is a very interesting place. I know I'm watching very closely what's happening in Barbados. And thank you so much on behalf of the International Society of Cannabis and the NEXUS Caribbean Series for joining us today and sharing the perspectives of those of the Barbadian regulatory system. It's truly inspiring to see how various regions are moving the same plant forward into the light. And like I said, we need to have more of these conversations, not just at a regulatory level, but just as a global community, so that we can help each other. And as you had mentioned earlier so eloquently, we need to learn from our mistakes and correct it as we go. And I really think that's a beautiful thing. Thank you again so much for your time. Congratulations to you and your amazing staff, because as you had mentioned, this is a team effort and clearly you have a great team. So thank you so much again for joining us here on the NEXUS Caribbean Series.
Thank you so much. I look forward to hopefully seeing you and your listeners in Barbados November 6th and 7th of this 2026 for Beige Can. Um, Thank you so much and have a great day.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.